There are some shocking new developments in the friendly fire death of a Chicago police officer. So let's break it down for you. Today, the family of Officer Krystal Rivera revealed that she was in a romantic relationship with her partner, the one who shot her last June. That shooting happened during the pursuit of a suspect in the line of duty. The family alleges that the partner, Carlos Baker, left Rivera to die and never called 911. They're now suing the police department and the city, saying they didn't do enough to protect Rivera from Baker.
She was a Chicago police officer, 36 years old, in full body armor, running beside her partner through a darkened South Side apartment building. Her weapon was drawn. The suspect was somewhere ahead of them. What she did not know was that the most dangerous person in that building was the man running directly in front of her. One shot, her partner's gun, her back. Officer Krystal Rivera died at the hospital less than an hour later. The man who fired that shot was not a criminal they were chasing. He was her fellow officer, one who had shared her personal life for nearly 2 years, who had shown up uninvited at her home the night before she died, and whose troubled record inside the Chicago Police Department stretched back to the very first day he ever wore a badge. This is her story, and it is not the story you were told. On the evening of June 5, 2025, Officer Krystal Rivera reported for duty with the Chicago Police Department's 6th District Tactical Team and joined her partner, Officer Carlos Baker, for their shift on Chicago's South Side. Earlier that same night, before a single thing went wrong, she had already recovered 2 firearms from the streets. By any measure, she was doing exactly what her unit existed to do. At approximately 9:50 in the evening, Baker and Rivera were traveling in a squad car along the 8200 block of South Drexel Avenue in the Chatham neighborhood, when they observed a man on the sidewalk. His name was Jalen Arnold. Cook County prosecutors would later describe what the officers noticed as an unusually large bulge beneath Arnold's jacket, a profile consistent with a concealed drum magazine. When Arnold looked toward the officers, he ran. Rivera was out of the car before it fully stopped, jumping from the still-moving vehicle to begin the foot pursuit. Baker parked and followed on foot. Arnold reached a nearby apartment building, and someone buzzed him inside. The officers were through the door seconds later, weapons drawn. They followed Arnold up a staircase to the 2nd floor. He ran to the end of the hallway and into an apartment, pulling the door shut behind him. Baker reached it first and kicked it open. Inside, Arnold jumped over a couch. But Arnold was no longer the most immediate problem, because at that moment, a second man inside the apartment stepped into view. His name was Adrian Rucker. He was holding what prosecutors describe as an AR-style rifle, and he pointed it directly at the officers from behind the couch. Baker's body camera captures what followed in a matter of seconds. He can be heard saying "wait," and then "oh," as he registered the weapon aimed at him. He turned, appeared to stumble, and his firearm discharged. One shot. Krystal Rivera was directly behind him in the hallway. The bullet struck her in the back. Her body camera went dark. A scream was captured on the audio. No other shots were fired that night. Not by Rucker. Not by Arnold. Not by any other officer on the scene. The only weapon that discharged in that building was Baker's. Baker ran up another flight of stairs to the 3rd floor, calling out "shots fired" at police and broadcasting the 10-1 emergency signal over his radio. Approximately 25 seconds after firing, he called down toward where Rivera had fallen. "Krystal, you good?" There was no response. Over the radio, he told dispatchers he could not reach his partner. He requested an ambulance and a SWAT team. Then the footage shows him sitting on the stairwell landing. Body camera video released by the city's Civilian Office of Police Accountability shows Baker remaining there for approximately 1 minute and 44 seconds while Rivera lay on the floor below him. He did not go back down. He did not render any aid. When he eventually returned to her, he first stepped over her motionless body before turning back to take hold of her. He grabbed her by her bulletproof vest and dragged her toward the stairs, repeating her name as he moved. According to Rivera's family attorney, Antonio Romanucci, Rivera had already managed to radio in her own shooting before Baker reached her. Other officers arrived and got Rivera out of the building. She was loaded into a squad car for emergency transport to the hospital. That vehicle crashed and caught fire on the way due to a mechanical malfunction. Rivera was moved into a second vehicle and taken to the University of Chicago Medical Center. She died there less than an hour after she was shot. The Cook County Medical Examiner ruled her death a line-of-duty homicide. She had been struck in the back by a single bullet fired by the officer running beside her. That is what the body camera shows. That is what the medical examiner confirmed. But what those cameras did not capture, and what the department's own records reveal about the months and years leading up to that night, is a far longer and more troubling story. If you are new here, subscribe now to True Crime Evidence Files. This channel covers cases where the full truth outlasts the headlines, and this case has layers that most people never heard about. Hit subscribe, stay with us, and let us show you what the official statements left out.
Yeah.
Come here.
Hey!
Give us your hands.
Let me see your hands, bro!
June 5th, 2025, two Chicago police officers chase a suspect into a Chatham apartment building. What happens next unfolds in seconds, but the fallout lasts for months. Body camera video from Officer Carlos Baker shows him sprinting up a stairwell, his partner, Officer Krystal Rivera, right behind him. In seconds, everything changed.
Let me see your hands!
If you look closely, Baker kicks open an apartment door and comes face to face with an armed man. Surveillance video from inside the unit shows it even more clearly. Within seconds, Officer Rivera, a mother of a young daughter, is shot in the hallway and dies. Neighbors immediately call 911. After the shot, Baker retreats up the stairs. Nearly 25 seconds later, he calls out.
Krystal, you good?
There's no response, and moments later, Officer Baker is back on his radio.
You need an ambulance! Ambulance, now! I can't get my partner!
It takes almost 2 minutes before Baker returns to Rivera. He finds her bleeding on the floor, then drags her down the stairs, telling her this.
Stay with me.
Use of force analyst Mike Brown says this is when the officer didn't use his training, and that could be because the situation was stressful.
Before any of what followed can carry its full weight, it is necessary to understand who Krystal Rivera actually was. She was born and raised in Humboldt Park on Chicago's west side, in a neighborhood that shaped a great deal of what she would carry with her through the rest of her life. From early on, she was drawn to the idea of public service, of being someone who showed up for the community rather than looked the other way. When she graduated from the Chicago Police Academy on October 20th, 2021, at a ceremony held at Navy Pier, she told reporters she had chosen law enforcement because she wanted to help people. The people who knew her best would confirm that was never a scripted answer. It was simply who she was. She was a single mother. Her daughter's name was Isabella, Bella, Medina, and Bella was 10 years old when her mother died. By every account from family, close friends, and colleagues who worked alongside her, Bella was the center of everything Rivera did. The tactical work, the long hours, the nights running toward danger on Chicago's south side, all of it was framed, for Rivera, by the knowledge that a little girl was at home waiting for her. Rivera worked with that knowledge every shift. It did not slow her down. If anything, it sharpened her. On the job, her colleagues knew her as Mama Two. The nickname reflected something real about how she operated. Her commanding officer, 6th District Commander Michael Tate, described her as a true leader, the kind of officer who would stop him in the hallway or come up to his office on her own initiative to ask where the team could make the most difference. She did not wait to be pointed at a problem. She looked for one. Rivera had been with the department for 4 years at the time of her death. In that time, she had built a reputation that her personnel record backed up cleanly. Every investigation that followed confirmed it in writing. She had not been accused of any misconduct at any point in her career. She was regarded by leadership as one of the unit's most committed officers, disciplined, controlled, and devoted to the work. Beyond the badge, she was a woman of deep Christian faith, known for a sense of humor that could shift the energy in a room before she said a single word. Her laugh was the thing people remembered most, loud and infectious, often ending in a snort that tended to set everyone else off. She had a sharp eye for fashion, a genuine love of basketball, and the kind of loyalty to the people she cared about that made them feel, without question, that they mattered to her. Her closest friend, Jen Tapacio, spoke at Rivera's funeral about 22 years of friendship. 22 years of honesty, inside jokes, and plans that stretched far into the future. Tapacio told mourners that she and Rivera had made a plan to pick each other up from a retirement home someday. That was how far forward they were thinking. Rivera also carried a longer professional ambition. She had always intended to eventually become a forensic investigator. The badge was not the final destination. It was a step in a direction she had mapped out for herself. On the night of June 5th, before she left for her shift, Rivera stopped at her grandmother's home. Her grandmother had prepared alcapurrias, Puerto Rican fritters made with plantains and ground beef that were Rivera's favorite. They sat together. Her grandmother held her and said in Spanish, "I love you very much, daughter. Take care of yourself." Rivera answered, "I love you more, Grandma." Those were the last words they ever exchanged. Her grandmother told mourners at the funeral that she thanks God for every minute of that evening. Rivera reported for duty and went to work. She did not come home. Chicago Police Superintendent Larry Snelling was at the hospital with Rivera's family on the night she died. At some point during that vigil, Bella looked Snelling in the eye and asked him one question. "Was my mom a good police officer?" Snelling recalled the moment at Rivera's funeral weeks later. He told mourners, he replied, "Your mom was an exemplary police officer. She was magnificent." The questions that followed her death were never about her record, her conduct, or her character. Those things were never in dispute. The questions were always about the partner she had been assigned, and about a department that saw what was building and did nothing to stop it. Officer Carlos Baker joined the Chicago Police Department in December 2021, approximately 10 months after Krystal Rivera. They were placed on the same unit in early 2023 and assigned as partners. That summer, a romantic relationship developed between them. It was on and off, and according to court filings and statement from Rivera's family, it lasted for nearly 2 years. Other officers on the unit knew about it. At least 2 supervisors were also aware, according to the wrongful death lawsuit later filed by Rivera's family. What those supervisors also had access to, or should have, was Baker's disciplinary record. And that record is where the department's accountability failures become impossible to ignore. From the moment Baker joined the force, his file began to accumulate. His very first day as a probationary officer produced a sustained finding of disobedience. That was day 1. In the months that followed, while Baker was still in his probationary period, the window during which the department has the clearest authority to dismiss an officer without union interference, he accumulated 5 complaints. One of them was filed by a woman he had been dating. She alleged that Baker brandished his service weapon at her while she was on a date with another man at a North Side bar. The conduct described falls under Illinois' legal definition of domestic violence. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability opened an investigation. It closed that investigation in 3.5 months, a fraction of the agency's own average review time of 20 months, without reaching any finding. Baker faced no discipline. He remained on the force. The complaints did not stop. By the time of the shooting, Baker had accumulated more than a dozen misconduct complaints in fewer than 4 years. According to data gathered by the Invisible Institute, a nonprofit that tracks police accountability in Chicago, that record placed him in the worst 5% of all Chicago police officers. He received 3 formal suspensions and 2 reprimands across his short career. One suspension stemmed from a civil rights violation. He was involved in a high-speed vehicle pursuit that ended in a 7-car crash and failed to report it to his supervisors afterward. A sustained insubordination complaint documented him telling a sergeant in explicit terms that rank-holding officers had no authority over him. In March 2024, Baker applied for a transfer to the Gresham District's tactical team, the same specialized unit where he and Rivera worked. The department's chief of patrol, John Hine, denied the application. The reason was documented in writing in an internal memo. Baker's disciplinary history made him unfit for the assignment. Less than a year later, in January 2025, Baker applied again. And this time, John Hine reversed his own decision and approved the transfer. Baker had not cleaned up his record in the intervening months. He had added to it. No public explanation for the reversal has ever been provided. Baker was placed on the tactical team in approximately March 2025. He and Krystal Rivera were partners again. By that point, the personal dimensions of their situation had shifted significantly. In early 2025, Rivera discovered that throughout their entire relationship, Baker had been dating and living with another woman simultaneously. She told Baker she intended to inform that woman of what had been happening. Baker pushed back. Rivera ended the relationship in late May 2025. What followed was not a clean professional separation. Rivera went to her supervisors. She told them Baker was reckless. She formally requested a partner reassignment and expressed a desire to transfer to a different district entirely. According to the wrongful death lawsuit, at least 2 supervisors were aware of the relationship, aware that it had recently ended, aware of the tensions that had developed, and aware of the safety concerns Rivera was raising directly to them. Her request was not granted. The 2 remained assigned as partners. On June 4, 2025, in the early morning hours, Baker appeared at Rivera's home uninvited. She had told him not to come. According to court filings, this was not the first time he had done so. It was less than 24 hours before they would share a squad car again. What Rivera could not have known was that the system designed to protect her had been documenting Baker's behavior for years and doing very little about it. The decisions that placed them together that night were not the result of a single oversight. They were the result of a chain of institutional choices, each one compounding the last, that left a woman with every reason to fear her partner with no way out. And then the shooting happened. And then the questions about what came after it began. In the immediate aftermath of the shooting, Officer Carlos Baker told investigators that both he and Krystal Rivera had been fired upon. He suggested, at least initially, that the shot that struck Rivera had come from someone other than himself. That account did not hold. Authorities publicly confirmed on June 6, 2025, the day after the shooting, that Baker had fired the only shot discharged in that building. The bullet came from his weapon. One day later, on June 7, 2025, a tactical response report was signed and submitted to document the incident. A tactical response report is the standard official form filed after any use of force event involving Chicago police. The narrative section of that document states, "The unknown subject discharged a firearm at the involved member, causing a fatal injury." The department had already confirmed 24 hours earlier that no unknown subject had fired a weapon. The firearm that caused Krystal Rivera's fatal injury belonged to Carlos Baker. The report was signed anyway. It was never corrected. The original incident report filed for the case describes Rivera as having been injured by a fender. A second version of the tactical response report, this one identifying Baker as the shooting officer, noted separately that the armed subject inside the apartment had displayed his weapon but had not fired it, and acknowledged that the first and only shot in the building came from a police officer. 3 Official. In interviews with agency investigators, Baker offered his account of the moments leading to the discharge. He described believing he was in what tactical officers call a fatal funnel, a confined space where movement is restricted and the threat of incoming fire is direct. He said that when he saw the rifle pointed at him, he believed he was about to die. He described the discharge of his weapon as unintentional, something that occurred as he attempted to take cover. He also addressed his relationship with Rivera. He told investigators he considered her his best friend. He denied being in a romantic relationship with her, saying their encounters had been limited to no more than 3 occasions. In one recorded statement, he said, "I just want to speak to Krystal and say I love you and that I miss you. I will never forget you. I won't let you down, I promise." In a later session, when asked to revisit the footage repeatedly, Baker told investigators he felt he was being gaslit and mentally drained by the process. He said, "I did nothing wrong, and the whole world is making me seem like a monster. My life is ruined." Baker's attorney, Timothy Grace, argued that the physical circumstances of the shooting, the height of the officers, their positioning in the hallway, and the angle of Baker's weapon at the moment he turned, created a combination of factors that could not have been predicted or replicated in any controlled environment. The president of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 7, John Catanzara, publicly defended Baker after the footage was released, arguing that everything relevant to the discharge occurred within 3 seconds of Baker registering the threat. Catanzara also encouraged Baker to consider filing a lawsuit against the law firm representing Rivera's family. Rivera's family's legal team offered a different reading of the footage and a different explanation for the time that passed before Baker returned to his partner. The wrongful death lawsuit alleges that Baker's failure to render aid was not tactical hesitation. It alleges that Baker understood Rivera's survival would mean she could disclose what she knew about their relationship to his other partner, and that his decision not to immediately return to her reflected that knowledge. That allegation remains untested in court. What is documented, in writing, in the official record, is that the forms filed to describe Krystal Rivera's death contained information that was demonstrably false at the time they were submitted. And those forms were never corrected. While that paper trail sat unchanged in the department's files, the men whose actions had set the events of June 5th in motion were either already in custody or about to be found. Adrian Rucker was 25 years old and originally from Freeport, a small city in northwestern Illinois. He had been inside that Chatham apartment when Arnold came through the door with officers in pursuit. After the shot was fired and Rivera fell, Rucker fled the building. He did not get far. Officers located him a short time later hiding between two buildings near 82nd Street and South Maryland Avenue, approximately 2 blocks from where the incident had occurred. He was taken into custody that same night. When prosecutors ran Rucker's name, they found 6 outstanding warrants from multiple counties including Cook, Winnebago, and Stevenson. Those warrants covered a range of prior conduct, including domestic battery, weapons offenses, and a juvenile charge of aggravated discharge of a firearm. He had been wanted across multiple jurisdictions for years before June 5th. When officers executed a search warrant on the apartment, what they recovered told a more complete story of what that building had been used for. They found a second firearm, a handgun, and ammunition, alongside bags and jars of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. They also recovered identification documents from multiple states bearing Rucker's photograph. Prosecutors described the scene as an active drug preparation operation. The apartment was not simply a residence. It was a working criminal enterprise that Arnold had led 2 police officers directly into. Rucker was charged with 113 counts covering armed violence, drug possession, possession of a firearm without a valid firearm owner's identification card, and possession of fraudulent identification. He was denied pretrial release at his first court appearance, with the judge finding he posed a real and present threat to the community. Rucker's aunt, Monique Reed, appeared outside the courtroom to contest the prosecution's account. She told reporters her nephew had not been armed that night, called the charges a railroading, and argued he had been made a scapegoat by a department looking to redirect accountability away from the officer who pulled the trigger. As of May 2026, Rucker's case remains active and unresolved. Jalen Arnold, the man Rivera and Baker had been pursuing when they entered the building, was not arrested the night of the shooting. He was gone. It took 14 days to find him. On June 19, 2025, officers working alongside U.S. Marshals located Arnold near 75th Street and Vernon Avenue on the city's south side. He was taken into custody on a parole violation. At the time of his arrest, he was carrying 11 bags of suspected crack cocaine. Arnold had a prior felony conviction on gun charges from March 2023, for which he had received a 7-year sentence before being released on parole prior to June 5th. He was charged with armed violence, possession of a firearm by a repeat felon, and drug possession. In April 2026, nearly a year after Rivera's death, Arnold appeared before Judge Barbara Dawkins in a Bridgeview courtroom and pleaded guilty to felony weapon possession and a drug charge. He was sentenced to 8 years, to run concurrently with a 3-year sentence on the separate drug count. His attorney told the court he expected Arnold to serve closer to 3 years under standard sentencing calculations. Krystal Rivera's mother, Yolanda Rivera, was in that courtroom. She addressed the judge directly. She told the court that the officer who shot her daughter had failed to render aid when it was critically needed, and that it was deeply difficult to accept Arnold carrying the weight of accountability while that officer remained employed and uncharged. She described the 8-year sentence as extremely severe for the man the officers had been chasing, not the man who had fired the weapon. 2 suspects were now either convicted or awaiting trial. The official investigation into the officer who fired the shot remained open. The family civil lawsuit was moving through the courts, and the full picture of how the Chicago Police Department had handled every stage of this case, from the assignment decisions made months earlier to the documents filed in the days after the shooting, had not yet been fully examined. That examination is where this story goes next. Stay with True Crime Evidence Files. The second half of this documentary covers the department's complete institutional response, what the community demanded, what the oversight investigation has and has not produced, and the systemic questions this case has forced into the open that reach far beyond one night in Chatham. Subscribe if you have not already, and keep watching. As of May 2026, Officer Carlos Baker has not been charged with any crime in connection with Krystal Rivera's death. The Cook County State's Attorney's Office has not indicated publicly that criminal charges are under consideration. The Chicago Police Department classified the shooting as an unintentional discharge from the outset, and that classification has not changed. Baker did lose his police powers, but not because of the shooting. In August 2025, approximately 2 months after Rivera's death, the department stripped Baker of his badge, his service weapon, and his arrest authority following a separate incident at a bar in Chicago's Wicker Park neighborhood. He was accused of assaulting an off-duty female police officer at that location and then, in the days that followed, making calls to nearby businesses and contacting at least one journalist in an effort to obtain surveillance footage of the altercation. The department characterized those efforts as an attempt to interfere in its own internal investigation. Baker was not charged in connection with that incident either. As of May 2026, he remains employed by the Chicago Police Department in its alternate response section, where officers stripped of police powers or not cleared for full duty handle non-emergency calls. He carries no weapon. He has no arrest authority. He draws a paycheck. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability has been investigating the June 5th shooting since it occurred. That investigation has produced no public findings. In April 2026, nearly 10 months after Rivera's death, the agency released footage related to the incident. The release consisted of 2 videos. Records show the agency's file on the case contains at least 12. By comparison, when the agency investigated the shooting death of Adam Toledo, it released 23 video files. When it investigated the shooting death of Dexter Reed, it released 17. Rivera's family's attorneys called the April 2026 release a curated narrative designed to present a false version of events, and stated that their legal team had viewed footage prior to the public release and identified at least one discrepancy between what they had seen privately and what was made available to the public. The agency's deputy chief of investigations defended the scope of the release, stating she had determined what was relevant to TH. 3 weeks after Rivera's death, her family's attorney sent a formal letter to Superintendent Snelling demanding that the Illinois State Police conduct an independent investigation into the shooting, that all unedited footage be released in full, and that Baker's complete personnel file be made public. No independent investigation was announced in response. The wrongful death lawsuit, filed in December 2025 and naming both Baker and the city of Chicago as defendants, contains 9 separate counts including willful and wanton conduct, negligence, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It argues that the department was aware Baker was unfit to serve, aware of the personal dynamics between him and Rivera, aware of the safety concerns she had raised directly to supervisors, and chose at each decision point to take no meaningful corrective action. The lawsuit is an active litigation. No trial date has been set. For Rivera's family, the legal process has moved slowly against a backdrop of grief that has never had the chance to settle. In the days immediately following the shooting, officers and community members gathered at the 6th District Police Station on West 78th Street, the station where Rivera had reported for duty, for a prayer vigil. Purple bunting had been draped across the building's exterior. It is the color the department uses to mark a loss. It had gone up before the week was out. Rivera's funeral was held on June 25, 2025, at Living Word Christian Center in Forest Park, a suburban church west of Chicago. A visitation had been held the day before at a funeral home in the western suburbs, where officers lined the streets outside before the doors had even opened. The morning of the funeral, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker ordered flags across the state flown at half-staff through sunset. Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson attended the service. Hundreds of officers arrived in full dress uniform, filling the pews and lining the steps outside. There was a rifle salute. There was taps. Bagpipes played as Rivera's casket, draped in a Chicago flag, was carried out. A slideshow set to music moved through photographs of Rivera throughout her life, at her graduation, with friends, making faces with her daughter. Superintendent Snelling addressed the congregation about what Rivera had represented on the force. He told mourners she had been a police officer in every sense of the word, a hard charger who understood what it took to go out and keep people safe in the city she had chosen to serve. He then made a direct promise to Bella, who was seated at the front of that church. He told her, "We're going to watch you grow, go to college and fulfill your dreams. And when it happens, we'll be there." At the conclusion of the service, Snelling folded the Chicago flag that had lain across Rivera's casket and carried it to Bella. She clutched it to her chest. Rivera's cousin Felix Batista, a retired Chicago police officer, held a fundraiser in her honor later that same day on the city's west side, organized with the support of a group called the Brotherhood for the Fallen. Batista had been one of the people who encouraged Rivera to join the department years before her death. He spoke that day about the conversations they had before she made that choice, the dangers they had discussed together, and a decision she had made with open eyes and a clear sense of purpose. By the time the fundraiser doors had been open a few hours, more than $10,000 had been raised in her name. Rivera's mother, Yolanda, addressed reporters publicly in the weeks following the funeral. Her words were not complicated. She accepted the risk that came with policing, Yolanda said. What she never should have had to fear was her own partner. That betrayal cost Krystal's life. That statement, from a grieving mother, landed in a city and a country already asking harder questions. The public conversation that grew out of this case went beyond the individual conduct of one officer. It reached into the policies and practices governing how departments assign partners, monitor personal relationships within tactical units, evaluate misconduct complaints against officers seeking specialized assignments, and define what an officer's obligation is in the seconds after a colleague goes down. Krystal Rivera's death did not create those questions, but made them impossible to avoid. Within the Chicago Police Department, officers spoke privately about what the case revealed, about how little visibility supervisors sometimes have into the personal lives of those under their command, and about what happens when they do have that visibility and choose not to act on it. The department made no public policy announcements in direct response to the shooting. The conversations it triggered were happening behind closed doors, in the way that institutional discomfort tends to. On a wall at the Chicago Police Department, Krystal Rivera's name has been added to the memorial listing officers who died in the line of duty. She is there alongside officers who were shot by strangers, officers who died in pursuits, officers who went to work one day and did not come back. Her name belongs on that wall. What does not fit neatly anywhere is the question of how she got there. The facts of this case, laid out in sequence, tell a specific story, but they also tell a broader one about what happens when institutions have the information they need to act and choose not to. The probationary period in law enforcement exists for a reason. It is the window during which a department can evaluate a new officer and remove them without the full procedural weight of tenure and union protections. During that window, complaints against Baker had already mounted. One of them involved conduct that Illinois law classifies as domestic violence. The oversight agency closed that investigation without reaching any determination. Baker remained on the force. That sequence, the complaint, the closure, the absence of consequence, is not the product of a broken system. It is the product of choices made within a functioning one, by people who had the authority to choose differently. What makes the decision to ultimately approve Baker's tactical team transfer so consequential is not the first application or its denial. It is the reversal. The reasoning behind that denial was written down. The circumstances that prompted it did not improve. The reversal came anyway, made by a named official with both the information and the authority to decide otherwise. 3 months later, Krystal Rivera was dead. There is also a pattern in Baker's record involving his conduct toward women that the accountability system encountered on multiple occasions before June 5th and responded to each time with an action. That pattern was not hidden. It was documented. It was visible to anyone who looked at the file. No formal public finding has ever addressed it. Rivera used every formal channel available to her. She communicated her safety concerns to the people within her chain of command who had the authority to act on them. Those concerns were received, acknowledged at the supervisory level, and known to those in a position to respond. They changed nothing about her assignment. That is not a failure of communication. That is a failure of institutional responsibility. The broader question this case puts in front of every police department is not simply whether romantic relationships between officers on the same tactical unit should be disclosed. It is whether those relationships should be permitted at all, what obligation a command structure has when an officer raises a safety concern about a colleague, and what standard of action the concern should trigger. Rivera's request was not ambiguous. It was an officer telling her chain of command she did not feel safe with her assigned partner. The system received that message. It sent her back to work with him Anyway, there are names attached to every decision that brought this case to where it stands today. The official who approved the transfer after having once denied it for documented reasons. The supervisors who received Rivera's concerns and took no action. The agency that reviewed a prior complaint and reached no conclusion. These are not abstractions. They are identifiable choices made by people who understood what was in front of them. When institutions protect themselves before they protect the people inside them, the cost is almost always paid by someone who believed the system would work. Krystal Rivera believed that. She had every reason to. What Krystal Rivera believed, and what her record confirms, is that she did everything right. She followed the training. She ran toward danger. She made a choice, years before that night, to put on a uniform in one of the most demanding cities in America and go to work in the neighborhoods that needed people most. Nothing about her conduct on June 5, 2025, or at any point in her career, was ever called into question. She held up her end of the agreement that policing asks of the people willing to make it. The system did not hold up its end. The oversight investigation has yet to produce a public finding. The lawsuit moves through the courts. The man who fired the shot remains on the city's payroll. The questions Rivera's family has been asking since the morning after she died have not received complete answers. That is where this case stands today. If you have watched this far, drop a comment below with your thoughts on this case. We read every one of them. True Crime Evidence Files covers cases like this every week. Cases where the full story takes longer to surface than the headlines allow. Subscribe if you have not already, and stay with us for our next case. There is a little girl in Chicago who is now 11 years old. She is growing up in the absence of the person who is the center of her world. One day she will be old enough to watch the body camera footage, to read the lawsuit, to understand in full what happened on South Drexel Avenue, what the records show about the months that led there, and what the department has and has not done since. She will reach her own conclusions. She will carry them for the rest of her life. What she already knows, because she was told on the night her mother died by the man who led the department her mother served, is that her question had a clear answer. Her mother was exactly the kind of officer she had hoped she was. Krystal Rivera was a daughter, a friend, a woman of faith, and above everything else, a mother. She ran toward danger because it was the job she had chosen and the person she was. She deserved to come home that night. She deserved better than what the department gave her. Rest easy, Officer Rivera.